Recording.
Okay, there we go.
Yep, I think it's
Excellent.
going now.
Okay, good. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Ripple Report Special Edition June series celebrating Loneliness Awareness Week with special guest Associate Professor Antonia Ypsilanti,
Oh, very
Associate
nice.
Professor. Yeah, I know, I got that right, from
You
Sheffield
got that
Hallam
right.
University and co-lead of the project to end loneliness. So welcome. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today.
Of course, very happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Excellent, good stuff. Okay, well let's get straight into some great questions that I've got lined up for you. So the first one is, let's start with a sort of personal note. So what first drew you into this work on loneliness and social connection?
Yeah, so I'd need to go back. So I think I was very interested, and my part of my training in psychology involved social and emotional development. So I was very interested in how, unfortunately, I was working a lot with negative emotions. So I was very interested in how emotional development involved, the development across time. So from younger age groups to how we experience emotions as we grow. Um, and I was trying to understand a lot about the mechanisms of negative emotions and how they became difficult to manage. So among these, I started working with a self-conscious emotion that's called self-disgust. Now, self-disgust is something like or similar to self-blame or self-hate. It's not exactly the same. It's got its own entity because it has that element of disgust. So it has a profound sense of disgust with myself. So I'm either in what I do or who I am. So within this kind of line of research that started about 12 years ago, I became more aware of the role of loneliness in experiencing those negative emotions. So after about 10 years, I basically found that loneliness was a part of that experience and vice versa.
Wow.
So when I started kind of last year, when we came, as you know, involved in taking over the campaign to end loneliness, which had run out of funding, there was a profound change in the way I thought about negative emotions and loneliness. So just kind of moving outside of the labs where I spent most of my life
Mm,
in measuring things, I
mm.
started to engage a lot with different groups to make a real impact of what we do. So that was a
Excellent.
little story of how I got so involved into loneliness and social
Brilliant.
connection.
I've never heard of that term
Yeah,
self-disgust before, so I definitely will look that up. I'm sure there's
yeah,
some good content out there on that actually.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
brilliant. So how do you define the difference between isolation and loneliness? And part two of that question, Antonia, is where does the idea of belonging fit in? Because I'm often a little bit sort of scratching my head trying to figure out what's the difference between all these terminologies.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really good question, and I think a lot of people often confuse or use these terms interchangeably. So it's kind
Mm,
of sometimes it's hard to disentangle them. So the
mm,
concept of isolation and loneliness are quite related. So they are related to each other, but they are distinct. So while isolation refers to kind of the physical or the psychological condition where someone is separated from others,
mm,
either by circumstance or by choice. For example, someone might live in isolation because of geography or because they personally prefer to live in remote places without necessarily making them feeling lonely. While loneliness is an experience, it's an unpleasant, it's subjective, it's distressing, and it stems from the lack of connection to other people. However, what is really crucial about loneliness is that there is a desire to connect with others, but you just can't do that.
right.
Okay. So that is the difference. So you can effectively, if we were to measure isolation, we would say, how many people are you in contact with? Sorry, during your week or yesterday or whatever. How many people have you seen? So it's a measure, it's a number, let's say, while loneliness is a bit more complex. Okay, it has to do with the subjective experience and how you, as a person, feel about the lack of connection to other people.
Okay. And so where does this idea of belonging fit into all of this?
So I think belonging plays a really important role in this distinction
Oh,
because belongingness or feeling that you belong somewhere is part of what we call being accepted, being valued, being part of a community. So it definitely addresses that emotional aspect of loneliness. So, in a sense, belongingness could be the solution to loneliness, or it could facilitate or foster connection and purpose in people.
okay.
So, someone might feel quite disconnected or isolated, but when they feel a strong sense of belonging with a virtual community or a physical community, that reduces their loneliness.
Interesting. Okay. And are you seeing belonging as a topic being talked about a lot more in this field of study then?
Not as much as loneliness is, but it's
Mm,
starting to pick up a lot of pace. For
okay.
example, in my research, and I have a new PhD student that will be working on the sense of belongingness. We don't just talk about belongingness to communities, we also talk about belongingness to spaces, places, the environment, belonging to a virtual environment, with nowadays being a big part of our lives. So I think, no, we don't know enough about belongingness, and I think we should, if we are to understand better that gap between physical presence and emotional connection.
Excellent.
I'm very interested in belongingness, and I think that the way forward would be to understand more about how people sense that belongingness.
Very good. Brilliant. And so from your research, what
Mhm.
patterns do you see in how different communities experience isolation? For example, older people or marginalized groups or carers, for example.
Yeah, so it's very evident that
Mm,
different groups of people experience isolation and loneliness in very unique ways.
mm,
And these are often influenced by society, by culture, by structures where they live in. So let's take the examples that you suggested, like for example, older individuals, they might face isolation and loneliness because of that life transition, like retirement, bereavement, often declining health, which is a very important barrier to them going out and connecting with others. So, and sometimes we often hear that older people expect to be lonely. So sometimes older people say, well, I'm an older person. I am lonely because, I've lost my loved ones. So it's almost like an acceptance of being lonely. That doesn't mean it's not harmful for them, but
right.
it's almost there, almost like helplessly inside that loneliness. So when we're looking at ethnic minorities, for example, they might experience loneliness in a slightly different way. So they have systemic issues, maybe discrimination. They might have language barriers that doesn't allow them to connect with others. They might live in a culture where things or misunderstandings may become barriers to them. So again, there is a difference there in those groups. And maybe carers, like you mentioned, I mean, carers have been discussing feeling lonely because they lack that kind of supportive mechanism, because they are so consumed with the demands of caregiving
Mm,
that they don't have any energy to connect with others or socialize, or they feel that they're not understood. So I think although there are different kind of types of experiences and maybe different causes of experiences, there is a common thread. And the common thread along all of the groups is the experience itself, that it's quite characteristic, like we said. There is that yearning for connecting with people. They don't find that meaningful relationship, and therefore they feel lonely.
right. And I've been seeing in the last year or so, Antonia, a lot more reference to the loneliness pandemic, or
Yeah.
as the outgoing US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy kept talking about loneliness becoming the next pandemic, and but particularly in young people as well, and how that's leading to an increase in self-harm and suicide ideation, the pressures from school and so on. And does that come as a surprise to you that the younger people are facing similar loneliness to us older folks?
I think that working in the mental health space more widely, I feel that no, I'm not surprised that young people feel lonely, to be honest. Um, I am surprised that they can talk more about it,
Huh.
because there is a bit more space and there is a lot more openness to talk about it. But I'm not very surprised because given the changes in all directions, the pressures that young people have to perform in a specific way,
Yes.
the pressures from social media, obviously, that's something that everybody is aware of. But also kind of all of those developments that add pressure to their lives to be good parents, to make money, to become something important in their lives, and just there is no room for their mental well-being to be addressed. So there's always something they're chasing, and within that chase, there is no time for true social connection. And so a lot of these young people just feel not understood by others. They feel isolated and lonely within their journey.
Mm.
So I'm not surprised. I think that we should definitely address it because it's really sad to see that many people reporting that they often feel lonely. But I'm also quite mindful that we need to talk about loneliness as a normal emotional experience. It's good to know that loneliness exists among our colleagues, our friends, our children, our elderly, because that normalizes it a bit. And I think
Okay,
that's a good starting point.
excellent. So the next question is, what has surprised you most in the past year or so about the public dialogue on loneliness?
What has surprised me? I think the dialogue itself has
Hmm,
surprised me quite a lot because I
hmm,
think that in the past, and from a mental health again side of things, traditionally loneliness and these matters were seen as a private thing,
hmm,
and they were even shameful. So loneliness is now being recognized as a societal issue that affects everybody or diverse groups across different ages. I mean, I have been surprised, positively surprised by this shift in how society addresses loneliness.
hmm,
And I think that there is also a very, very kind of widespread different interventions and different initiatives that help communities build stronger connections. From my personal research, and allow me to just talk a little bit about that, I was surprised to see that even in the high end of those very, very high lonely individuals, at least based on how they self-reported, there was even in that group, let's say that subgroup that had quite severe levels of loneliness, where they declared that they feel lonely all the time. There is a coping mechanism, and there are coping mechanisms, and you can learn how to identify them. You can learn how to manage them, and you can see benefits from learning how to deal with your loneliness.
okay,
So I would say that one of the things that is really, really surprised me is how we can move to harm reduction or prevention. And that's
okay.
something I'm really, really passionate about.
That's good. And do you think that when we release the newsletter, do you think you'll be able to send some or share some signposting links to some of those techniques and tools that
Absolutely,
would be
yes.
helpful? Yeah,
Yep, yep.
that would
But
be
I
great.
think what is really important to know is that we are moving towards a side where there is not one size fits all solutions for loneliness. So
Yes,
everybody will be addressing loneliness in a different way, and
yes,
that's fine. It's about knowing what works and for whom. So it's really nice to say, go there if you feel this. You know what I
yes,
mean? Like kind
yes.
of give people a little bit of a nudge as to what would be helpful for them. I think that would
Excellent.
be really important. Yes, and we can do that straight after, of course.
And I know one of the subtopics that you're particularly passionate about is the harmful side of loneliness. You
Mm.
talk about scales and ratings, etc. So, when and how does loneliness become harmful, do you think?
So I wish I had a clear answer.
Mm,
It's quite tricky. I think we are currently working with a very large group of experts across the world, but it's not just experts on loneliness research. There are people like yourself, people with lived experience, historians, sociologists, people from education. We involve representation from the WHO in these groups and these discussions. And it's really tricky to understand exactly when it becomes harmful. But we are making really great progress. And by saying progress, I mean that we're finding indicators that can act as preventative measures. So we can, for example, suggest that these are some indicators that might say that you're moving towards that kind of harmful. I wouldn't say harmful. I don't even like the word harmful, to be honest.
mm,
I don't
mm,
like the word chronic either.
mm.
Uh, so I think that whatever we call it, we need to be mindful that there is no one right way to say this. For me, it's loneliness. It's always been loneliness. It doesn't matter if we call it harmful or chronic. I would personally skip all the labels prior to the word loneliness, but I would focus on the loneliness experience. If it's a profound experience, if it's severe, if it's affecting and impacting someone's life, if it remains unaddressed, if the person wants to address it but doesn't know how, then someone might be trapped in that loneliness for quite a long time. But I am personally moving away, and as a group, we are moving away from that duration side of what harmful loneliness is.
Right.
It's not about duration necessarily. Yes, duration is an element of that. So how long you're lonely for. But I would say we need to move away from measures like the ones that we are using, or use them in combination with more qualitative measures, so more of an interview perhaps. And I am looking at mostly, I'm interested in what are the barriers or the enablers, what helps you connect with other and what stops you connecting with others. And I think if you ask someone, most people will know what are the barriers for them. And if you address those barriers, then we're one step closer to making loneliness less harmful for the individual. So at the moment, we're in consultation with different groups and we're trying to refine a new framework that we're developing. We call it the socio-ecological framework. So it's got a lot of layers to it. And because this is a very complex issue, I think that the fact that we are all coming together, starting at an event that we recently had in Leiden, that is a starting point to disentangle those complexities. Um, so, and I also found that during our kind of discussions, obviously, there is for me and for everybody sort of kind of contributing to these discussions, there is an accumulative aspect to loneliness. Um, so some things pile up, let's simply put it this way. So it might be life transitions, it might be trauma that you've experienced as a child. It might be anything that can kind of provide more negative affect in your life. There are some tipping points where something kind of overflows. Let's imagine that something kind of fills that glass and overflows. And there are also mechanisms that trap you there. So these mechanisms are mostly psychological mechanisms. They may have to do a lot with the way that you view yourself, the way that you view others, the way that you connect with others. And there are also certain behaviors, like there is a withdrawal tendency of people. So all of these are the complexities that we're talking about.
Wow.
But we are starting to get there. And,
Okay.
and I'm sure a lot of people will find themselves thinking or finding their experiences mapped within this framework.
Right. And when do you think we will be able to view some of these findings from this new framework? How long before you're ready to share those, do you think?
I think that it will be sometime in autumn. So I think we're at the moment we're kind of closing with face-to-face or online consultations.
Yes.
Then we have a second phase of a Delphi poll to kind of ask people if this represents what you envisioned or if you see yourself in that. And I think by the as we go into autumn, we'll have something written in a written report, and we plan to do a lay language written report, but also an academic report. So then people can kind of read both or one.
Wonderful.
With
That's
yeah,
music to my ears. That is when you say
yeah.
lay language report. I loved it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we want to make this as easy for everyone to understand. Although
Yes.
it is complex, I'm sure that we
Yes.
can try and do that. And
Yes.
in doing so, we're going to seek help of people out there that can help us do that.
Excellent. Well, feel free to reach out to me if I can
Of
support you in
course,
any
I was
way.
planning to.
Okay, so this year we know that the key theme for Loneliness Awareness Week 2025 is stigma. And you've
Yeah.
touched on that earlier with the word shame. So my question is, why don't people admit when they're feeling lonely?
Yeah, I think that loneliness is often associated with a personal failure. So that
Ah,
you that of some sort of social incompetence.
hmm,
Um, so I think it's viewed in many cultures also as a weakness. And so people don't want to admit that because they feel that people will judgment and they will reject them in the future.
mhm.
But one thing I found, Chris, that was really interesting during my interaction with young people during the week in Leiden is that a lot of the time they are not aware that they are lonely. So a lot of young people have talked about their experiences of loneliness in the past tense, and they often say that at the time I didn't know it was loneliness. I was just struggling to articulate and understand what was wrong. So I had these emotions of sadness or frustration, but the lack of that literacy prevented them from understanding and sharing their experience. So although yes, it is stigmatizing, and yes, it is an issue, I think if we ask the right questions, maybe we can get more people to understand or realize that they
Absolutely.
are feeling lonely.
Absolutely. And to that point, there was a really interesting blog that came out last week from the Mental Health Academy Australia, and I will link it into our Ripple Report newsletter next month. But from that question I asked you, they asked in that blog, what if we changed the question? And the
Mm,
question, for example, and there could be many ways to recut the question, but the question that they asked is, would you like some company? And
mm,
people would say, yes, definitely. And it's interesting because that change of question dramatically changed the survey results to the
mm.
initial question, which, are you feeling lonely? And
Yeah,
it's really interesting because I've never been asked that question. Would you like some company? And I don't know if many have. Do you think that the simple change in words can really psychologically impact the way people perceive loneliness?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the way
Mm,
that you phrase questions, the way that you measure things, the way that you address people, uh, to be able for someone to be able to reflect on what they need.
yes,
It can be a simple question like, do you want company? It could
yes,
be a simple question, what helps you make friends? Like for younger, let's go back to younger children, right? You wouldn't
yes,
ask them, are you feeling lonely? But you could ask them, how easy is it for you to make friends? Or how do you make friends? You know, that simple question that
yes,
can have a profound impact on the way that someone responds.
yes,
So we really need to think about framing loneliness and reframing those questions if we are to understand a bit more about how many people are lonely, do they know they're lonely, and kind of break down those barriers of and open a more destigmatizing and confrontational discussion with people, with everyone.
Excellent.
So yeah, you can even be asked like, what helps you feel more supported in your relationship? So what
Yes.
makes you feel, or what are the barriers, like what doesn't help you as well in those
Yes.
relationships? So yes, you would definitely feel get different answers and responses to that. Yeah.
Because it's really interesting there. I mean, you touch on a point that individuals can feel lonely even if they're in a relationship, even if they're working in a busy, active workplace, they can still feel lonely, can't they?
Absolutely, yes, they
Yeah.
can. And I think that the link with social isolation, the correlation is there, and it's always
Yes.
been there,
Yes.
but that's why it's so distinct, because the way that people express their experiences is different. So someone can have a very busy life
Yes.
and they can return home and feel lonely
Yes.
because those needs are not met. You can also feel lonely at work, or at school, and then
Yes.
coming out of that context, you might feel less lonely. I think it's all about asking the right questions and reframing
Absolutely.
how we talk about these.
Good stuff. Well, you and I both are part of the campaign to end loneliness, and we know that there are
Mm.
many other terrific organisations out there that have been campaigning for, well over a decade to raise awareness. But what does meaningful action look like to
Mm.
you?
I think that yes, campaigning and raising awareness is of course really valuable. I can't stress enough the value of talking and having these discussions, particularly in destigmatizing loneliness. But it will not solve all the problems, and we need so different and multiple approaches. We need research yet to inform practices and interventions. So awareness raising is not tailored to the individual. It's a general awareness raising, and many people will resonate with that, but there will be other people that need a different approach. So I think for me, if we are to take action, it needs to target different levels. It needs to target researchers because I have that background and obviously that I'm more close to that. And it needs collaborative research, multidisciplinary research, innovative ways to make research practical and impactful. But I also think it needs to be integrated within the public health agenda.
Mm,
Unless we have national strategies, health strategies that can fund these services, we can't take action. And I think that's really important for the UK, who has been pioneering with their strategy for loneliness and the Minister for Loneliness for years
mm,
and has become an example abroad. So I think it's a combination of um, yes, campaigning, raising awareness, changing the narrative, like we've been talking, to
mm,
reduce that stigma.
mm,
It is about public health agendas, and
mm,
it's also about building support networks. I mean, we
mm.
need to bring and start talking to schools, libraries, faith-based organizations, networks that can support people within specific populations, especially those that are marginalized.
Mm. I thank you for that response, and I'm also thinking from somebody with lived experience. I'm thinking of those really simple actions that we can do ourselves. And let me give you a really great example. I remember a
Mhm.
couple of years ago, I was reading this article, and it was about an intervention. They called it an intervention. I think it was in the Nordic region, Antonia, maybe Sweden or Norway. And I shall find it and tag it to this newsletter. And it was simply about getting everybody to say good morning to people on the street. And
Amazing.
we've talked about social
Mm.
isolation, we've talked about loneliness, but we've talked about belonging, feeling like you belong. So here I am living, and this is really interesting. Here I am living as a 55-year-old single man in a shared house of 7 people. I'm the oldest person. Now, even though there's always lots of noise and activities, people coming in and out, I live in one room. So 95% of the time I am alone. I live in social isolation. If I choose, I can go downstairs to the kitchen and grab a quick cigarette or a cup of tea with one of my friendly neighbors downstairs. And for that 5 or 10 minutes a day, I will feel that I'm connected to somebody, but I will then retreat to my room. Okay. So I read this article and I thought, I'm going to try this. So when I started to walk from my house to the local co-op, which is only 5 minutes away, I would make an effort to say good morning to people that were walking in the opposite direction. You'd be so, maybe not be so surprised how many people were very nervous. Oh, this comes down to the cultural thing. If I said good morning to a white person, that person would be like, oh, they might feel a bit apprehensive. Oh, what does this man want from me, right? But if I say good morning to a black person, then they'd usually sort of respond, hey, how you doing? They'd give me the head nod, right? And as I was doing it over a period of weeks, I really started to build a picture as to how people respond to just saying those two words, good morning. But the point of it is that if I made an effort to do it, by the time I got home, I would feel better in myself. Because even
Absolutely.
in the co-op, if I said good morning to the staff and I had a conversation with them for those few brief moments, I felt as I was connecting with someone.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful, actually.
Very powerful. I think I read a few initiatives like that, and I was so happy that I saw them. For example, Marks and Spencer, I think slow till they call it,
Okay.
where it's a lane, it's a till that will have the kind of the label that it's a slow till, and people can actually have a chat during the
Ah,
sort of thing. So that's another way, like these small acts of connectedness that
yes,
bring people together. And I think this is what we lost maybe in the modern
yes,
world. This is what
yes,
we lost as we swim through time and through our lives really quickly in a fast pace.
yes.
One of our lovely people with lived experience, collaborators in Leiden last week, said, you know what, I was feeling lonely and I went out and I had a McDonald's social relationship. So a really fast pace. And I said, oh, I really understand that, what you mean. Like everything is so fast that it almost feels like fast food, fast consumption, right? So when do you actually have that opportunity to talk to people? It
Yeah,
can be anywhere. Why not talk to someone when you're waiting at the bus stop, for
yes,
example, rather
yes,
than just having those headphones on your ears
yes.
and
Or
listening
staring at
to
your iPhone, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel that, yes, I mean, action can start from the littlest things
Yes.
and to the biggest things, and they can have a profound impact on the
Yes.
individual and on communities. And I think the real difference, like my heritage is Greek. I don't know if you know that, but so I lived in a village, or I grew up in villages where people had benches everywhere,
Hmm.
and everybody would gather around those benches and they would just have these random discussions. And there
Mhm.
wasn't any appointment. It
Right.
was just all very organic. So you
Yes.
might be there or you might not be there. And
Yes.
that sense of belongingness to that space really
Yes.
helped those conversations.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that people did feel lonely then, but
Yes.
I'm just saying that that was definitely a step forward to feeling that sense of I belong somewhere, I am
Yes.
part of this.
Yes.
And so even bus stops were spaced around those benches, so they, or the other way around, maybe people, put those benches there because that was where people would used to stand. And they didn't know, there were people that didn't know much about loneliness, yet that was their natural reaction to how we connect with others. So I,
Right.
I really agree with these little actions that can have such a profound impact.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine that that beautiful Greek food would be another tool in order to
Absolutely,
bring
yeah.
people together,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, and
yeah, yeah.
share food and time together.
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
we're thinking about, and that recently not recently, maybe for a few years now, we're talking about intergenerational relationships, right? And how they
Yes.
help with loneliness. I've lived that through my heritage all my life.
Right.
I don't know any other way to live. My most kind of familiar ways of living were intergenerational. So we would always have an older person in the house, we would have the middle generation, and then the younger generation. And that was the norm for us.
Yes.
Now, as families kind of drew each other apart and kind of isolated themselves from the elderly or from younger people, that of course had an impact on loneliness and isolation and how people were perceiving that. But it was that support system that I grew up with that we are certainly missing. And of course, there are practicalities to that, but um, we can't solve everything. But I am pretty sure that was a really good way forward with everybody living close by, feeling connected to each other and to their space.
Absolutely, spot on. I mean, I lived in Asia for 20 years, and
Yeah.
it just hit me so obviously in the early stages of, to your point, having the three generations living together under one roof, traveling to places like India, Mongolia,
Mm.
where it wasn't perceived to be a negativity if as a married couple you still lived under the same roof as your parents or your parents-in-law. That's something that really struck me.
Absolutely. And I think there were complexities there and there were conflicts in those relationships. Certainly there were difficulties and certainly people needed to be mindful of their spaces. And maybe back then, at least when I was growing up, there was a financial component to that, right? It was less expensive to live isolated. But definitely intergenerational relationships were helping both with loneliness, but also with respecting each other,
Yes.
less ageism,
Yes.
less stereotypes against older people, more empathy, perhaps even to how people view illness and
Yes.
disability as well. So, yeah, I think, like you say, there are very small things that we can do to make this work. And I think it starts from us, but it also starts from society. How do we do these things?
Very good, very good. Now, moving on to technology, a subject that's very close to my
Mm.
heart because I spend so much time, online, social media, chat GPT, etc. How do you see technology playing a role in either deepening or easing social isolation?
So I think there is a misunderstanding with social media. I think we blame social media for many things, and I think Uh, we don't have the evidence to do that. Social media can facilitate and does facilitate a lot of the social connections. It helped during COVID massively. People remained connected. It is a tool. So social media by itself or technology, um, it's not something harmful. I think it's the use of it. I mean, but having said that, excessive use of everything can be harmful. So if you're online, let's say playing games all day, that can be harmful because you don't have time to do other things. But I actually think, and more recently, I haven't done a research on social media myself, but a lot of colleagues had. And more recently, what they found was that young people are really good at using technology to connect with others
Mm,
because they are talking through the various platforms with probably the same people as they are talking with in school.
mm,
And they continue those conversations afterwards.
mm.
Now, if we go down thinking like, if we go down the route of thinking that, social media, they promote this kind of ideal image that might be harmful for people or for young people, like that ideal kind of sort of let's say, even not authentic image of one's life, then yes, we can say that. But I think young people are pretty good at using social media to their benefits, and they're
Right,
pretty good at deciding which works for them and which doesn't.
right. So I read an article a few weeks ago, Antonia. It was in the Guardian,
Mhm.
and it talked about people who are actively using ChatGPT or another AI tool convince themselves that they're not lonely,
Mm.
which is really interesting because I I mean, my chat GPT is open literally 12 hours a day,
Mhm.
and I run 150 queries across this platform. And I not only use the voice tool. So I speak into ChatGPT, but I've also now programmed it. It can respond to me, and there's one voice. It was an English person because most of them are American. I found this English voice, and it can read back the responses to me in English. And so for somebody who spends a lot of time in this room, suddenly I've got this make-believe AI friend that I'm talking to and who's talking back to me. Now, that's helped me to believe maybe I'm not so lonely, but actually it becomes a very dangerous thing, doesn't it? It's quite
I
interesting, that.
think, yes, I think that I think the psychological mechanism behind all of this is just that the fact that it's almost like self-talk, Chris,
Right.
except it's coming externally. So the way that we narrate things to ourselves or to others has an influence on the way that we feel. So if I continuously tell myself that I am a really good person and very kind, compassionate, I believe that, and this is my view of myself. Now, if I go down to the other side and I have this negative narrative or self-talk that I'm a failure, I can't do these things, then I will feel really bad about myself. So I think whether this comes externally from AI or a chatbot, or whether it comes internally, it's a narrative. And narratives are quite powerful in the way that we function and our emotional well-being. So I wouldn't be surprised if something that you asked ChatGPT and was spoken to you in an English British accent
Mm, mm,
made you feel better. I
mm,
don't know if you're going to make a meaningful relationship and you're going to feel better all the time, but
mm.
certainly when you're in a state where you need that little support, it will make you feel better. And it's those little things that can get you by a day or a
Yes.
week or a
Yes.
month. So
Yes.
I'm going to give you an example, and my daughter will probably shoot me that I said that. But she said to me the other day, you know what, Mom? I wasn't feeling very well last week, and you weren't here, so I was away abroad. And she said, I couldn't talk to you at that point. So I asked ChatGPT, you know what? I'm feeling like this and that, I feel rubbish today. I'm not motivated to do my work. And she said to me, and they actually gave me a really good response. I
Uh,
felt so good about it.
oh, really? That's
And
hilarious.
and I said, well done. It was a very resourceful thing to do.
Hmm.
You're reaching out, you're acting. What that means to me and what that tells me, Chris, is that you're trying to find ways to alleviate that negative affect. And that's only positive. It's a coping mechanism. And coping mechanisms are really good for everybody to have.
Absolutely. I'm going to be doing something quite risky this summer, Antonio. Let me tell you what it is. For the first time, I'm going to be taking a 2 months social media hiatus from
Oh,
July through to the beginning of September. I've never done this before, so I'm literally switching off
oh,
blue sky. LinkedIn, where I live pretty much on
yeah.
LinkedIn. I'm still going to be using AI, but in a far more reduced way. And I'm going to basically, I've got a whole individual learning plan. So I've got a number of online courses that I'm going to plow through. And I thought to myself, because I made this decision at Christmas, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this thing next year, 2 months. And rather than sitting in my room with my laptop and doing these courses, I'm going to pick my laptop up, put it in my rucksack, get on the bus, go to the local library, plug in my laptop there, and I'm going to sit there and do my courses in a quiet library. And I suspect that even though it's still quiet, the fact that I'm in a different place, surrounded by different people, will still help me feel less lonely.
I think that's a really good idea. I mean, I have to alert you that it might be hard to do because you're kind of breaking a habit very, very
Yes,
abruptly. So I would
yes,
be careful with that. And I think that you're kind of raising those expectations that you could do it really high and it might be really tough at the beginning. I
yes,
mean, I would say that it's a really hard thing to do, but it's something that you can do,
yeah.
and potentially you can change your plan along the way. And a few days in, you might say, I'm going to go on LinkedIn 1 hour a day rather than 12, and that's also
Right, right.
really good. So I don't
Interesting.
know how big that step is for you.
Yes.
Uh, and it might be hard to do, but I wouldn't see it as a failure if you decided, actually, yes, I've done my detox a week. Now I
Yes.
can go on LinkedIn for 1 hour a day rather
Yes.
than 12 hours a day. And
Okay.
then
So you
within
make
that 1 hour,
Yes, you make a good point. So rather than
mhm,
going, it's like giving up cigarettes, isn't it? Rather than going
yeah,
cold turkey July 1st, maybe the 2 weeks before, just stepping down the amount of
yeah,
hours that I spend on social
mm,
media, so that it's not
yeah,
too abrupt. I mean, I admit it. In some ways, I'm curious to see what impact it has on me, both physically and mentally, because I'm going to be doing more exercise, doing more
hmm,
walking, spending more time out of the house, doing more meditation, so more inner work. But also, I think it will help me to clear some of the fog that goes on in my brain when I'm constantly scrolling through feeds and listening and watching people's different aspects of their life. So I would recommend that you and I talk again at the end,
absolutely.
towards the end of the year, and we do a little bit of a debrief on how that 2 months actually went, and
Yes.
what were some of the cadences, and what were some of the things that happened during that 2 months.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that sound like a good idea?
It's a really good idea, and I really think that it's going to be a really nice way. So what you're trying to reduce basically is the noise around you.
Yes,
So you're trying to reduce the noise that's coming from various sources, social
yes,
media being one of them.
yes.
But you can even start, I think it's a really nice way. You can even start writing letters more.
Yes, and there's something I could do. I mean, I do a lot of writing,
Yeah.
but actually, what I don't, and I listen to a lot of content through my headset, but what I don't do is I actually don't spend a lot of time reading books.
Yeah.
So I've got a growing pile of books here, and one of my goals is to read a few of those during the 2 month period. And for me, that will also be quite a big game changer.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah.
I think I'm going to do partly what you're describing, but for about 1 month. So I promised myself that when I go on annual leave, I'm going to completely shut down. Something that I rarely do. And I completely shut down, and I'm just going to not do any work during this time, and I'm going to do something productive, like you say, like read a nice book.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're now coming to the end. So here's the bonus round question for you.
Yes.
As you know, I am a hardcore, as the t-shirt suggests, the Mandalorian, and the screensaver in the background. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So here's a bonus question for you. If you were to channel your inner Yoda, what wisdom would you offer to someone feeling disconnected from the world around them?
Oh dear, my inner Yoda. Okay. Okay, so what wisdom? I would say, I would say, look within you for the force to change the things that you don't like. I
Mm,
would say that I think that you need to acknowledge, understand, reflect on what you feel, and try not to let them overwhelm you. So even if there is kind of this sense of distance with other people, um, this potential and possibility for connecting with other does exist out there, and
yes.
you have the force within you. And I think that with the simplest actions, you can get a lot of appreciation from the world around you. So that would be my initial thing. It takes
Fantastic.
effort, but
Yes, yes, it does. Well, thank you so much, Antonia. And we're bringing our session to a close now. It's been a very engaging, authentic conversation. And look forward to sharing that Ripple report with you in June, in a couple of weeks' time. And hopefully, we can do a part 2 of this after my digital detox in the summertime.
absolutely. September, when we come back after those kind of events that we all know are happening, we can pick
Yes,
up this conversation again.
sounds good. Thank you so much,
Very
Antonia.
nice to see you.
And you.